Thank you for joining the Resilient Cyber Show. My name is Chris Hughes, and today I'm joined by Sandy Dunn. Sandy, thanks for being here.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you. For folks that don't know you, haven't been following your presence online on LinkedIn and platforms like that, as well as some of the work you've been doing with Owasp and so on. Can you tell us a bit about your background?
Well, I like to. I've had a long career within technology. I started in cybersecurity in about 2001 before we even started calling it cybersecurity. So I remember the argument when everyone was upset about what we should call it. And there was people who were anti-cybersecurity. I started in competitive intelligence at HP, doing competitive intelligence on their digital senders. And at that time, I was like, well, if we're sending off these devices, shouldn't we care about where and who's sending what? It was really the first IoT device. So I'm just super curious and started listening to different podcasts. The Paul.com show, if you probably remember that, and I take every episode and write down what they talked about and go download it onto the HP network. Sometimes I cringe when I think about some of the things I did trying to experiment. But so through HP, I had a number of different careers, ended up on their cybersecurity team. I left them to join Blue Cross of Idaho as their CISO. I've had a couple different CISO roles since then, CISO as a startup, and I just started at a new organization that I'm pretty excited about.
Very cool. Yeah, you've had quite the adventure, and a lot of different roles to give you a lot of different perspectives, throughout your career. And I originally came across you because I kept seeing your association with the OWASP, organization, and most particularly the OWASP top 10 LLM project. So I'm curious, like, how did you get involved in that? How did it get on your radar? And can you tell us a bit about how that came about?
So when ChatGPT first came out, I was a little bit it took me a second, probably 30 to 60 days before I went and got my own account. I've been through so many hype cycles, as I'm sure you have, Chris. I mean, we just got done with Bitcoin, or we're not done with it completely, but, we just saw that kind of go. People get really excited about that. And when I first started using ChatGPT, I was absolutely just enamored with it. I found it to be the most terrifying and the most interesting thing that I've ever seen. And throughout my entire time that I've been working with OWASP and talking with different groups and doing my own experiment, I still have those two extremes where I'm completely terrified and also completely enthralled with what's capable, what you can do with it.
Now, how about the project itself? For folks that haven't I shared
Okay.
a link to it, but for folks that haven't dug into it, haven't checked it out quite yet, can you give us a high level overview of the project? What the intent is, and what you have done so far?
Absolutely. So, as I was in that discovery stage, there was a whole bunch of discords. Kai Grayshake, who was one of the original people who started talking about prompt injection, he had a great Discord channel. And then I found the OWASP Slack channel, and I just started lurking. And then as I watched the channel, I just started seeing ways that I can contribute. And so they were having these meetings every 2 weeks. I started joining, started seeing where I could help, and jump in. So that's the great thing about OWASP. It really is there. If you want to contribute, if you want to be part of the project, jump in. So at the time, I proposed a sub-project to Steve Wilson back in August, and he really liked it. And that was the checklist that you and I have talked about. And so there's been a number of different other OWASP groups that have sprung up, the OWASP AI Exchange. So because of my contributions in the LLM top 10, they said, hey, Sandy, you're doing, we love what you're doing over there. Would you come help us over here? So I jumped over there too. So we're just started the 2.0 for the LLM top 10. So if you're interested, go out to our OWASP channel, jump into the Slack, start attending the meetings. Anyone who'd like to contribute is welcome to come join us and be part of it.
Yeah, definitely recommend folks check it out. I've learned a lot going through the list of top 10 threats and just looking at ways that this technology can be both abuse as well as how you can mitigate some of these threats if you're an organization using LLM and Gen AI platforms and so on. I want to talk about some of the top 10 items themselves. You talked about prompt injection. I know like the top 3, for example, are prompt injection, insecure output handling, training data poisoning. Can you talk a bit about those? Why those kind of made their way to the top of the list, and what are some things organizations can do to kind of rectify risks associated with them?
Yeah. So if you think about how a prompt works, it's unique in that your command, so your execution and your data are kept together. And so the challenge with that is you can tell a model to do anything that you want. You can give it a command. And so that's prompt injection. Prompt injection is when you're basically telling the model, with whatever data you're putting into it, whatever command that you're putting into it, you're telling it to do something that maybe it wasn't designed to do. Of course, model owners put all sorts of guardrails trying to prevent you from doing that. And there's all sorts of different resources, basically firewalls, prompt injection firewalls, systems that look at the input and the output. But the reality is there's absolutely no way to 100% prevent this. And there was a really great webinar hosted by Lakera, where ultimately the models that we have today, to completely remove the threat of any kind of injection or modification, we almost have to re-architect the entire systems. So it is definitely a difficult problem as organizations move forward, which is, how much, can we rely on this? How much can we trust it? And the multi-model models, those are the ones that are actually even more difficult to protect. And so it's a really interesting, we've moved forward very, very quickly, as you know, with not a lot of ideas of all of the ways that this could possibly impact our organizations. Data poisoning is another one, which is, if you look, NIST actually just updated their adversarial attacks documentation, and if you start looking at all of the enormous number of ways that these models can be attacked themselves, so the model data can be attacked, but then a lot of the tools that people use to create and manage the models, historically before ChatGPT, really AI and machine learning was this kind of isolated, fairly unique community, full of incredibly smart people. Most of them have PhDs. Most of them have written a book. They're incredibly brilliant, but it was a small community where they shared a lot of those tools. They shared a lot of their data. There wasn't those standard security practices put into place. So there's just a lot of maturity. When we talk about it being the frontier, it truly is the frontier, and it's the jagged frontier.
Yeah, I think we're, we have a lot to learn, and we're just starting to kind of explore the risks and considerations of how we adopt these technologies in large organizations, enterprise environments, things like that. You also, the team actually recently produced what's called a security and governance checklist. And I'm curious if you touch on that. We love checklists in cybersecurity. It gives us something quick and actionable to take a look at. And it broke down different areas of risks and key considerations, whether it's legal or third party and so on. What was the kind of origin of that effort, and, how has that been received so far by the community?
So that was really my project. So I did about 95% of that. I had a lot of people that came to me and kind of offered feedback and suggestions, but a majority of that was really, from my history of working in cybersecurity and being a CISO. The first draft of it, I actually wrote it in the OODA loop format. And then I had to keep explaining to people what the OODA loop was. So I thought, well, I'll go ahead and take that, basically the format, if you look at it, it still follows that, even though I don't call it the OODA loop. That's basically the format that it follows. And what I was trying to do was really create the document that I could share with my fellow CISOs so that they could start preparing their organizations. The nuance to it is that even though there's minimal AI laws here in the United States, there's 14 new state laws that are around privacy and governance, and some of those cover biometrics. So even if you're implementing a model, there's a lot more that you need to think about holistically about, okay, where are we getting that data? If we have to go in and someone has to have their data removed from that model, how are we going to do that? Your legal implications. So what's your warranty and liability? Your insurance. Do you have will your insurance coverage that you have right now for your organization cover you if it's done, if AI is part of it? So there's just a lot to think about.
Yeah, I was reading the checklist. I had a couple of flights this week, so I dug into it, and I think it's a great actionable way for a security leader, or CISO, whomever in the organization, to get a good understanding of different domains of risk around using LLMs, and what are some key considerations from an organizational perspective. And as you point out, it's definitely a multidisciplinary problem where you need to look at this and say, okay, I need to engage my legal team. I need to engage, third-party risk management and so on, because the CISO is not going to have all this expertise in one place, and then also they're going to need to ensure that their peers are informed of some of these considerations as they go out throughout, their activities within the organization too. One thing I wanted to ask you about as well is, we've seen some organizations outright ban the use of these technologies, or at least, do so try to, right? Think they are. Yes, exactly. The shadow usage we know is still pervasive. And this one strikes me as, pretty odd, because we've seen reports recently from Microsoft and others, showing that malicious actors are starting to use Gen AI and LLM to carry out, some of their activities, whether it's gathering intelligence or creating scripts or exploits, etc. And the best way to get proficient with anything is through using it. So if we want to get proficient with securing LLM, shouldn't we use LLM? Shouldn't we encourage their use, obviously safely within the organization? But it's going to be very hard for us to be proficient, I think, with something if we don't allow people to explore and play with it, understand how it works and so on. What's your thoughts on some of the organizations that are outright banning this technology, or at least thinking they're banning it?
Right. And you'll notice in that checklist, when I list out the 5 varieties of threats, one of the threats I list is not using AI. And so, if you're not trying to implement it, if you're not trying to understand what this technology is, it's almost like somebody who's saying that I'm not interested in cars. When we were transitioning from the horse era to the car era, saying, no, I'm not interested in it, because you've now put yourself at a severe disadvantage compared to your attackers, compared to your competitors. I mean, and that's the balance that I think every organization is really challenged with right now. Is AI is both the solution and the thing that could potentially cause harm to your organization.
Yeah, I think that, one thing in the checklist that you just talked about that jumped out to me is, like, the business is going to inevitably feel pressure to keep pace with business peers, whether it's, developers wanting to write faster code, or, organizations wanting to be more innovative and add new features to their product or platform, et cetera. The business is going to want to use this technology, and us trying to outright ban it is going to have the opposite impact. What's going to lead to is it'll be used, and we just simply won't be aware of it. We'll be able to not implement much governance or oversight or security, and help our peers understand some of the risks, as they start to use these technologies. And I think it's going to have the inverse impact that we hope it will, by trying to ban it. So, I'm curious, from your perspective, what are some other resources, as organizations look to learn more about, Gen AI, LLM, AI, and more broadly, what are some other resources? We talked about the Owasp, LLM top 10. We have the checklist. What are some other key resources you recommend folks check out?
Well, obviously the Owasp AI Exchange, that group is putting together a great group of people who are from all over the world, who have expertise around machine learning and artificial intelligence. The Cloud Security Alliance is really producing some great documentation. I post a lot on the people that I'm following. I really think that this day in AI podcast, which is a group of 2 rascally brothers out of Australia, who just talk about experimenting with it all the time. And I love their take on things, because they're really just experimenting. I have a list. On my LinkedIn, I share who I follow. Of course, I'm a huge fan of Elon Malik, I believe. Ethan Malik is a great person to follow. So, and that's the other interesting thing that I've noticed in the our AI and machine learning groups that I'm part of, Chris, is because we're at that tipping point where there's so much and everything's happening so fast. We're reinforcing those human connections. We're going back and saying there's absolutely too much out there. So we're reconnecting with all of our peers and saying, you know, who are you following? What are you doing? How are you doing that? What tools are you using? What classes are you taking? Because there's so much out there, you know, as an individual, it's hard to keep up and know which is the best place to go or the right person to follow.
Yeah, I love that advice because, cybersecurity itself is so diverse, just like AI and machine learning, and there's no one individual that has expertise in all things. So getting out there, leaning into your network, seeing what organizations are producing, what content, a big shout out, like you talked about, to Rob Vanderveer and that group with Owasp. I've had him on the show and shared some of those resources. So from my perspective is, as you said, get out there, see who's working on what, follow those folks, ask what they're learning, how they're learning it, where can you come along on that journey, how can you up level yourself as well. So great advice. That said, take us to our final question that we ask every guest is, what does the term cyber resiliency mean to you?
For me, and Chris, I love the term cyber resiliency. For me, it's hoping for the best and absolutely preparing for the worst. Always thinking forward about, how am I going to protect my organization from when that bad thing happens? And that's another key point is for organizations, they are going to have to really look at their risk appetite. What we thought it is going to be a much more difficult question in the future, because to move forward with this technology, you'll have to be aggressive with it, and bad things might happen, and so have that discussion early.
Yeah, I like the aspect about having the discussion early because, as you said, hope for the best. But we all know hope isn't a strategy, as the saying goes. I can't remember who said that. So you need to get out there. You need to prepare accordingly, leaning into these resources. Upskilling yourself and your team. Implementing governance and guardrails, things like that. So great way to put it. And that said, it'll take us out for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and thanks to everyone who tuned in.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.